Hi, and welcome to the second part of the series, Lies That Divide Us. Today we'll be dealing with the clash of ideas. So our view of the world, ourselves, our view of ourselves and of others, determines our purpose in life, and it shapes our search for happiness. These views which we hold can often result in the clash of ideas. When our hopes or aspirations bump up against other people's wills or desires, or when we are forced to contend with the limitations of our natural environments and its resources, and then when we experience the fact that material consumption cannot buy us happiness, we naturally experience conflict. We're all aware of how political differences or differences in social philosophies lead to clashes of ideas, but I'm not wanting to deal with those types of clashes here. I want to try and take a larger view, a more macro perspective of the conflict of larger ideas. Sometimes, or something rather, which is frequently overlooked in the heat of political or social debate. For example, the world is madly in pursuit of economic development. As a society, we place no upper limitations on this pursuit. Everybody is crying, "I want to be as rich as I possibly can be." But this desire contains within itself no limiting principle, while the environment in which it is placed is strictly limited. But if we fail to see the inherent conflict in this clash of ideas, or if we do, we generally quickly discard the concern and push on with the notion of making money. And yet the consequences of pursuing unlimited economic growth cannot end in anything less than an utter catastrophe for our planet and its inhabitants. But why doesn't the recognition of this danger, even if the recognition is fleeting, incite me to action? Because, to put it mildly, I've lost the plot. I'm so invested in the philosophy of materialism, I don't really accept that I have any other choice than to move with the herd. The degree to which we have been brainwashed is not even obvious to us. People are mostly oblivious to the reality that what I consider as my ideas, my desires, my values, are not really my own. I did not form them alone. They were often influenced, if not completely shaped, by others. And I have often uncritically accepted these ideas as factual. Our shift from a needs-based society to a desires-based culture, which was the result of focused social engineering in the late 1920s, is proof of this fact. We will discuss this at some later point. If we are to find solutions to what ails us and much of modern civilization, then it requires we understand exactly where we are now and how we got here. One of the greatest shifts of modern civilization was the rejection of the concept of man having a spiritual component or of there being any spiritual reality. Now, I am aware that this is not held by everyone, but it is an idea that is largely held within the educational or the educational community, and many of the society's leaders. This conflict arose in the Middle Ages between the early Christian church and the growing scientific community. The church hierarchy took upon itself the mantle of infallibility and declared that they understood all things, even declaring at one point that the earth was the center of the universe, etc., etc. Of course, as the scientific or the growing scientific community began to explore, to understand, and to perceive truths that were contrary to what was being propagated by the church, a natural conflict arose. Over time, and after a period of persecution of the scientific community by the church, they were faced with this inevitability that they had to accept the fact that they were not infallible. And so there was this decision to declare that the church was not infallible in temporal matters, but they were still infallible when it came to spiritual matters. The scientific community had for a long time felt the brunt of persecution, and so there was a natural animosity that grew towards religion and ideas, any ideas of spiritual existence. We saw a growing of the theories of materialism. So materialism is fundamentally defined as being the theory or belief that nothing exists except matter and its movements and modifications. So there was this idea that all things could be eventually, if not now, but eventually explained within the framework of atomic particles and atoms and molecules and the energy that existed within the material sphere. Now, this conflict between the early church and the scientific community actually only occurred in Europe, but it had a profound effect on the world. As the European peoples became increasingly aggressive in their exploration and conquering of other cultures and regions of the world, they carried with them these ideas. And what we saw was that, like within the Eastern world, the Eastern communities, the Middle East and in the Far East, there was not this confrontation and this antagonism between spirituality and science. They were seen to be intimately connected. But in the Western world, we saw a development of what became known as rationalism. And of course, this idea of being a rational thinker means that if someone does not adopt my ideas, they must be irrational. So I think that there is a definition of rationalism as the practice or principle of basing opinions and actions on reason and knowledge rather than on religious belief or emotional response. I find that a little condescending, that definition, but it was very much the flavor of materialism in general. With the growing body of scientific discovery, there was this great anticipation that soon everything could be explained in terms of materialistic ideas. When Charles Darwin developed his theory of evolution, this was seen by the larger scientific community to prove that life and consciousness arose from matter. This idea has given rise to many other theories, and one I'll mention here, which we will deal with later, is that the mind is a function of the brain, and I'll explain the importance of that as we go forward. In the Eastern world, in Eastern spirituality, and in particular the ancient teachings of yoga and the Vedas, they propounded an entirely different paradigm. They put forward a teaching that there were two fundamental energies within the material realm. One was the element known as matter, and there was another distinct energy referred to as life or spirit, in Sanskrit, Brahman. So they taught that consciousness was a symptom of the presence of spirit, this energy. They also taught that the living being is inherently spiritual but covered by two bodies. One is a gross physical body that we see and experience. The other was a subtle body, experienced primarily as the mind. They did acknowledge and understood that the mind was intimately connected with the brain, but that it was not a product of brain activity. This is actually quite a profound idea. We won't go into it in detail here. Modern science has not sufficiently recognized its own weakness when considering the question of consciousness. The rather brilliant microbiologist and scientist, Dr. Robert Lanza, according to Time magazine, he is considered one of the 5 most influential scientific minds in the world. He has stated the following: nothing in modern physics explains how a group of molecules in your brain created consciousness. The beauty of a sunset, the miracle of falling in love, the taste of a delicious meal, these are all mysteries to modern science. Nothing in science can explain how consciousness arose from matter. Our current model simply does not allow for consciousness, and our understanding of this most basic phenomena of our existence is virtually nil. Interestingly, our present model of physics does not even recognize this as a problem. And in another statement, a full understanding of life cannot be found only by looking at cells and molecules.